Advocacy is about persuading others to your way of thinking. In a legal context, you're trying to persuade a tribunal to find in your client's favour. At work, you might be trying to persuade your boss to give you that promotion. Whatever the context, advocacy is a skill. It's something that you develop over time through persistence and practice. And there's no better place to learn this skill set than UK Bar School, which trains young lawyers to become court advocates. So in this video, I'm going to look at the fundamental principles that we were taught about advocacy and how it applies both to written and oral advocacy. Guys, it's nice to have you back on the channel. If you're new here, my name's Taz and I'm a future trial lawyer based in the UK. On my website, tazaldeep.com, there's a bunch of free resources available to support you on your own journey to the bar. Let's kick things off with written advocacy. The first and most important point here is study the facts, because to persuade you need to be certain, and you can't be certain if you don't know what you're talking about. After you've studied the facts, pull out what are the key issues. This will allow you to essentially create a roadmap to find your way through the advocacy exercise and know where you're trying to get to. The next piece of advice we were told is know your ask. So once you've identified the issues, be very clear what it is that you want. What are you trying to persuade the tribunal of from the outset? Because when you know that, that will allow you to draft very clear and succinct submissions. Use clear and simple messaging. Don't use flowery language, don't overcomplicate it, because they say simplicity underpins persuasion. And it makes sense, because if you're trying to persuade someone of something, what you're trying to say needs to be easy to understand so that you're even giving them the chance to agree with you. If you're overcomplicating it, people are trying to figure out what you're trying to say, they're not even following your message anymore and it's out the window. When you know what your message is, you want to think about how can I tailor this to the audience so it has the greatest impact when I'm delivering it. For each submission or proposition, they're the same thing. You present your point, you provide evidence for that point, and then you explain why the evidence that you've provided is relevant to the submission that you're making and ultimately supports the attempt that you're making to try to persuade them to find in your favor. The final couple points to mention is that structure is very important. So when you're drafting, let's say, a skeleton argument, everything should fall under a heading. If it's not in a legal context and you're thinking about delivering points to someone, in your mind, you should have thought about, okay, how can I structure these points to deliver the biggest impact? And the way to go about doing that is always start off with your most persuasive one first and finish with your least persuasive. And then at the end of your skeleton, you should have the final conclusion that pulls in all the mini conclusions that you've made along the way. Let's move on to delivery. So for delivery, the first thing and the most important thing when it comes to oral advocacy is to rehearse what you're going to say. They say don't script. I do agree with that, but not necessarily in the beginning. I don't think there's anything wrong with scripting in the beginning. I see scripting as like stabilizers. But as you gain experience, you're going to have to move away from the script, because the script inhibits you. It makes you very robotic and unnatural. So the way to move away from the script is by rehearsing what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. And I don't mean line for line, I just mean the general gist of the points so that your eyes can be up, facing the panel rather down in your paper. They say experiment with your advocacy style. I'm still doing it now. I'm very green in advocacy. I don't think you become an expert just because you've gone to bar school. Really, it takes years and years of practice to start to get the hang of it. I look at it like Goldilocks and the porridge, that one's too cold, one's too hot, and the middle one's just right. And that is the process you go through as an advocate to find your own style. When we were at bar school, they said, film yourself. And wow, I will never forget watching back my first recording. It was awful. My leg was shaking like that. I was crossing and uncrossing my legs unconsciously. My hands were moving too much. It was just too much movement. And really, when you start to film yourself and just consistently watch your performances, you can begin to remove bad habits and improve your performance. For me, and every advocate's going to be different. Everyone will have certain strengths and certain weaknesses, and it's just finding out what you can double down on and what you need to make up for. So for me, something that I noticed through the filming was my tonality was letting my submissions down, because tonality and the tone of your voice when you're delivering, it is the submission. If you sound flat and it doesn't make it very persuasive. So for me, I've had to consciously work on my tonality, and I find that it's made a big difference in my ability to persuade. The most common mistake that new advocates make, or anyone starting out in advocacy makes, is that they speak too fast. And it's a common mistake because when we're nervous, which we normally are doing some element of public speaking, we're just speaking a lot faster than we should be. And when you're speaking fast, there's two problems with it. One, you're having to think a lot faster about what you're going to say. So just slowing it down gives you some mental breathing room, but also it's a lot easier to follow someone when they're going at a nice steady pace. So for you, it makes it easier for you to think about what you're going to say, and for the person listening to you, it makes it easier for them hearing what you're saying. Once you've got your tone and your speed down, the next thing you need to think about is your volume on point? And the easy way of doing that is just ask a friend or someone who's listening to you to stand over there and ask them, can they comfortably hear what you're saying when you are properly delivering? And if they can't, you know you've got a volume issue, and you need to be conscious of that when you're delivering your submissions. And before you open your mouth, just clear your airways, get a glass of water, have a big cough if you need to. Whatever you need to do just to make it easier for yourself, so that when you're delivering, you're not fighting a rusty throat or something that's just making it more difficult than it needs to be. Now that you've cleared your throat and you're about to open your mouth, the most important rule in delivery is signposting. And the reason for that is that you want to, as the advocate, give the listener a roadmap and say, look, these are the issues that we face. I'm trying to get us to here. To get here, I'm going to take you through X, Y, and Z, and here we are. And then that way, the listener has to put zero mental energy into following your thread of thinking to get where you're trying to get to. The final thing to say on delivery is try to incorporate pauses. And this is a lot easier said than done. I'm still practicing it myself, but it's when you're drafting a submission or a written piece of advocacy, you know you've got something good. Be thinking about, okay, when I come to deliver this, before I move on to the next point, I'm going to just incorporate a couple seconds just to let it stick, so that the person listening to it can absorb, wow, okay, this is a really good point, and then you move on. You've prepared your advocacy, you've delivered your advocacy. Now, in some circumstances, like in a legal context, you may have to respond to a piece of advocacy, for example, if you're the respondent. And in these circumstances, what I would recommend is have a piece of paper or a diary next to you and just make notes as they deliver, and focus on what is the essence, what is the key point this advocate is trying to deliver, because these are the points that I'm going to focus on in my rebuttals. I'm sure many advocates would agree that when they started out in advocacy, they thought a gladiator brute force approach was the way to go. It's the mindset, I need to go in and I need to kill the argument and walk away victorious. But the reality is, a persuasive argument doesn't need to be put in by brute force. Like cream, it just rises to the top all by itself. When responding to advocacy, study your opponent. Think about what they're saying, how they're saying it, and what impact it's having on you, and make note of that and incorporate it into your own arsenal. One final point to say is keep a feedback log. A feedback of your own critique of yourself and the panel or the tribunal's feedback to you after your performance, because it will contain the good, the bad, and the ugly, and all of it will contribute to making you a better advocate. And other than that, guys, you know what it is. See you at the next one.